Well, welcome everyone. I want to wish everyone a happy Veterans Day. I'm Jay Prince, President and CEO of Heritage Community. I am so excited to kick off this meeting today. This has been a project that I've personally have had a deep passion for and a vision for over 8 years. So be here today. It's just a dream come true. This year, Heritage Community is actually celebrating 75 years of service to seniors in our local community. We truly want to see seniors thrive in Kalamazoo. Today on our campus, we serve over 400 adults on our 30-acre campus. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we are so proud to continue to be growing and expanding housing and services. First, through the development of Rebel Creek, you may have heard about this project recently. It's our new 60 apartment independent living expansion that's occurring right now on the west side of our campus. That's in addition to today's announcement with the Memory Care Learning Center. Now, Ashley, could you turn the slide for me, please? Now, of course, this vision can't be realized without a dedicated team that truly wants to make a difference for people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And certainly a project on this scale really requires excellence of a team of individuals as well as partners and donors that have surrounded. So I want to just take a moment to recognize the Memory Care Learning Center team and bring those to your attention. I'm very proud to be part of this team, of course. So is Kim Loftis. She's our Vice President of Fund Development and Executive Director for our foundation. Paul Barber is our Vice President of Operations for Heritage Community. And Ashley Lubbers, who will be speaking with you in a moment, is our Director of Memory Care. I would be remiss if I wasn't excited to be kicking off this event today with Dr. Henry Paulson as our guest speaker as well. Next slide there, Ashley. So the goal of the Memory Care Learning Center is to create access to education, information, and support for caregivers, and therefore serve a broader audience while reducing the inequities of accessibility to these critical resources, which is very important to us. The main objectives for the Memory Care Learning Center remain in providing support, guidance to individuals with Alzheimer's and other dementia, along with their caregivers. We will be a resource for answers and cultivate a sense of community to those that have recently been diagnosed with this disease. We will be providing free remote education and training and eventually in-person programs for our caregivers. We also will be providing fee-based professional conferences and be a hub for clinicians to present their best practices for dementia and Alzheimer's care. With that, I want to turn it over to Kim Loftis.
Thank you, Jay. I'm happy to be here today. It has been, as Jay mentioned, several years in the making, and we would be remiss if we didn't take a few moments to thank the more than 200 donors who consist of individuals, organizations, businesses, foundations who have made it possible for us to launch today and begin planning for our construction of our new space. The photo behind me, as well as the ones on the screen, are architectural renderings of the lobby of the new Memory Care Learning Center. Construction is slated to begin in early January and complete in early June. And hopefully, once again, by next summer, we'll all be able to gather and celebrate in person this beautiful new center where we can provide in-person programming as well as these virtual programs as we're starting today. So with that, I just want to say thank you to all the donors for making it possible. We would not be where we are today without you. Jay?
Thank you, Kim. I certainly echo that. Well, it's clear with this pandemic that it will not be ending anytime soon. And so after a considerable discussion with our local Heritage Community Foundation and Community Board, we've elected to be proactive and adapt our project as well as our campaign into 2 phases. So I want to bring you through what phase 1 of this new Memory Care Learning Center looks like. As Kim mentioned, we'll be utilizing our over $1.5 million that have been currently raised, and we'll continue to raise that money to be able to proceed with the launch of this remote education center today and develop a large portion of our original plan. These areas, as you see on the screen, will include the front entrance, a large conference room, reception desk, auditorium, hallway, which will provide space for group learning, support groups, one-on-one meeting spaces, as well as, of course, we want to maintain appropriate social distancing and gathering guidelines when this center is open. Actually, if you could switch over to the auditorium slide. So this is a picture of the auditorium for the large group education, and where some really adaptive and unique technology will be taking place. I wanted to share with you that the Memory Care Learning Center Phase 1 construction is expected to last 5 months, and we're planning to start the project in January of 2021, so coming up here very shortly. You should know that Bison Associates has been the architect on the project, and they have done just a fabulous job of opening this center up and making sure that it feels warm and welcoming for all that will enter it. Miller Davis Company, who many of you are familiar here locally, will be our construction partner on the project. So I look forward to hosting you for our ribbon cutting celebration event sometime this summer. This center is clearly needed more than ever, and I've been sharing that for some time. COVID-19 has left more individuals isolated and coping with the demands of caregiving all on their own in the home. By completing this Memory Care Learning Center Phase 1 with the funds that we've had to raise and will continue to raise, as shared before, we'll be able to keep the majority of our original goals even during COVID-19. We need to help people in our community now. And in response to COVID-19, we are so excited again to be launching this virtual Memory Care Learning Center. And we have developed a remote education programming to be able to provide that support to you now. We are all excited to have Dr. Henry Paulson with us today to kick off our programming. While the Memory Care Learning Phase 1 construction begins, we will develop a second capital campaign and create 4 small group meeting spaces, 3 offices, and storage, as well as renovate the public restrooms and corridors. So please stay tuned and follow us for what will be happening during Phase 2. We are inspired more than ever to complete fundraising and begin serving our community through this Memory Care Learning Center, virtually and in person. So thank you once again for your interest and your support of the Memory Care Learning Center and your time with us today to hear Dr. Paulson. Ashley.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Kim. It's really exciting to see what is to come as we continue working towards opening the Memory Care Learning Center in a physical sense, but it's important for us to be able to bring you some programming virtually since our current times really prevent us from learning together in person. So next up, we have Dr. Henry Paulson here to share with us the science of dementia, the latest research findings, and how the public can get involved in research and programs here in Michigan. Dr. Paulson, I'll let you take over the screen shortly while I share a little bit more about you with our attendees. Dr. Paulson is the Lucille Groff Professor of Neurology, and he directs the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center. He joined the center as Associate Director in 2009 and assumed directorship in 2011. He has worked for more than 20 years on degenerative brain diseases, both inherited and acquired. As a neurologist and neuroscientist, Dr. Paulson is deeply committed to translating findings from the research bench to the patient bedside. Toward that goal, he is focused on building connections between scientists, clinicians, and the public, not only across the U of M campus, but also across the state of Michigan. He received his MD and PhD degrees from Yale University School of Medicine and his neurology training at the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Dr. Henry Paulson.
So I guess I'll share my screen. Is that right?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Well, it's great to be here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Get this going. Well, let me say congratulations to you all. Thank you for the invitation. I wish you the best of luck with the construction of the Memory Care Learning Center. I think it's wonderful you're doing that. And Ashley, thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm going to give you a whirlwind overview here and I took 98 slides last night, and cut it down to about 30. And I hope that it's not too long. And I hope that you also put comments in the chat box, or if you have questions as I talk, please go forward and just shout out to me, okay? Let me start off with dementia versus Alzheimer's. And I think that I get to ask this question almost all the time. What actually is dementia? I think of it as an umbrella term. Really it includes a bunch of specific forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's, the most common by far, including more rare disorders such as frontotemporal dementia. But this particular cartoon is actually not a fair depiction of what dementia really is all about. This category of mixed dementia, which I'm highlighting down here, is probably the biggest category of all. When you look at people who've died with dementia, and you look at their brains, you don't usually just find pure Alzheimer's or pure vascular or pure Lewy body disease. You find a combination, which is very common. And that actually explains also why our ability to develop therapies for dementia has been a long haul and not yet fully successful. And hopefully, as we learn more about the heterogeneity and the mixed features of disease, we'll come up with better therapies. But I am going to focus primarily on Alzheimer's because it is the most common, and it clearly does drive a lot of the pathology that we see. Lois Alzheimer's described the case of Auguste D. over 100 years ago. She was fairly young when she first had cognitive issues, and she died a few years later. She had an early onset dementia. He described her cognitive progressive impairment, and then at her brain noticed that she had these unusual plaques and tangles. And he said, this clearly must be related to her disease. And so that was an important description of plaques and tangles, the key neuropathological hallmarks of Alzheimer's, were described over a century ago. And yet for a long time, people ignored it. They thought this is really not very relevant to late onset dementia because she was so young. And now we do know for sure that indeed, whether it's early onset or late onset, that plaques and tangles are the hallmarks of disease. These are not real images of a brain. The brain does not look like this. It's not this empty parking lot with a few neurons. It is packed full of neurons, but for the sake of illustration, this is showing you a plaque, which is outside of neurons. And whereas this is a healthy neuron with nice looking extensions or neurites, here this is not a healthy neuron. It's got these squiggly neurites, these dystrophic neurites as they're called. And this is in part because of the amyloid plaque that's present in the brain. And these tau and neurofibrillary tangles, and you can't get a sense of a tangle from these little balls of protein here, but these balls of protein known as tau can form these ordered fibrils that can accumulate inside these neurons as a bunch of tangles. So this particular neuron here, not only does it have a plaque outside of it, but presumably has inside of it a bunch of neurofibrillary tangles. And that combination is key to disease and is really the sort of sine qua non of Alzheimer's. A healthy brain is shown here in an image of the brain, an MRI, and here's an Alzheimer's brain. You can look at the two and see there's a big difference. And here, this is sort of a schematic showing you a healthy brain in cross-section, and here's a disease brain. And what's the big difference? Well, there's been a lot of shrinkage of the brain. That's because there's been degeneration of the brain. There's been a loss of neurons. There's been a loss of fibers throughout the brain, but they're highlighting here a couple areas, including the hippocampus. This little structure in the medial temporal lobe is critically important for memory. And when we think of Alzheimer's, most of us think, well, that's a problem with memory. And Alzheimer's can take many different flavors, of course, memory loss being the most common flavor. And that is because the hippocampus is significantly affected. And so this robust little structure that looks like a seahorse, hence called the hippocampus, gets shrunken quite a bit. And memory impairment becomes severe for most people with Alzheimer's. But I think it's important to appreciate that the degree of atrophy, the degree of shrinkage, is much beyond the hippocampus and involves other parts of the brain. And one of the reasons why we see different manifestations of disease in different people is that which parts of the brain become affected can vary quite a bit from person to person. Now, I mentioned to you that Alzheimer's described the case of Auguste D in 1906, but really nothing happened for a half a century or more. It was only in the 70s that the basic biology of plaques and tangles was discovered. And it wasn't really until the 80s that we had a sense of the clinical criteria for Alzheimer's. In the 90s, things really picked up pace. The first causative Alzheimer's disease genes that underlie rare familial causes were discovered. And we had our first symptomatic drugs in the early 90s. And by the end of the 90s, we had essentially the class of symptomatic drugs that we have today. In the 2000s, early 2000s, new genetic markers were found, not only for early onset familial disease, but for later onset disorders as well. The most common of these being ApoE, of course. And then over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen prevention trials take off. We've seen new clinical criteria in 2012. There's a new classification of disease known as the ATN classification that came out just a few years ago. And this year, there was description of new biomarkers in the blood. So we are moving very quickly towards a better understanding of disease and eventual therapies. Notice that there's no arrow on this slide that says the cure is found, a new great therapy is discovered. These prevention trials continue, and we don't yet have the home run. I would say we don't even have the single that we need for therapy for Alzheimer's. This is a sort of a schematic of the amyloid cascade. You have to have amyloid deposition in the brain in order for it to be Alzheimer's. But amyloid deposition is not sufficient. Amyloid deposition causes a number of problems, including activation of microglia, which in turn can lead to abnormal tau protein behavior, leading to neurofibrillary tangles. And it's really here where we start to see the signs of neurodegeneration, cells becoming dysfunctional and eventually dying. And so over here is an image of amyloid in the brain, and here's an image of tau in the brain, the two key proteins that underlie plaques and tangles respectively. And here is the atrophy that we see in the brain. So this is the amyloid, or A, this is the tau, or T, and this is the neurodegeneration, or N, in that new classification of ATN. So here it is, ATN is the new classification for Alzheimer's. I don't think it's important from a neurologist or a clinical perspective, but it is important for understanding the process of disease and what's going on. So if someone actually has Alzheimer's disease, they're going to have amyloid, they're going to have tau in the brain, and they have signs of neurodegeneration. So on this new criteria, ATN, they'd be A positive, T positive, and N positive. And so now I can see someone in the clinic, and if I had amyloid imaging or tau imaging, or if I had biomarker imaging from the spinal fluid, and I had an MRI to show me whether there's neurodegeneration, I could determine whether they meet these various criteria. So one, alternative would be an individual who comes to me in the clinic who has amyloid that's present, but don't have any evidence of tau, and there's no signs of neurodegeneration. Now, I bring this up, this particular A plus, T minus, N minus, because it's important to recognize that amyloid by itself is not sufficient to cause Alzheimer's disease. Amyloid initiates the process, but unless there's tau accumulation, unless there's neurodegeneration, there is no Alzheimer's. And the reality is there are people out there in their 90s who have amyloid in their brain who do not have Alzheimer's disease. So this new classification, if you will, which is not uniformly accepted by everyone, has led to a view of the disease. We don't speak now of Alzheimer's dementia, that is the clinical syndrome of dementia. We speak of an Alzheimer's disease process, which is occurring over, really, I would say, if you look at all three of these phases, over about 30 years. There's a prodromal period where there are no symptoms whatsoever, but we're already seeing in the brain the accumulation of amyloid. And there's a period of time where persons will have some degree of cognitive impairment, but not so sufficient as to cause dementia. That is, they are not functionally impaired by their cognitive impairment. And this can take on two different flavors, amnestic or non-amnestic. Amnestic literally means problems with forgetfulness, amnesia, if you will. And non-amnestic means other things are going on, problems with visual spatial processing or behavior, but the memory itself is not affected per se. And if it's going to be Alzheimer's in the end, most often the MCI period, the mild cognitive impairment period, is amnestic. And then there's dementia, and dementia itself goes through mild, moderate, and advanced or severe phases of disease. Again, this whole thing is going on for 30 years. So I'm 61. I don't think I'm cognitively impaired at this point in time, but if I'm going to get Alzheimer's in my lifetime, I almost certainly would be in the prodromal period. I almost certainly would have amyloid in my brain already. And down the road, I might get the MCI and then eventually the dementia. So we can image dementia. We can see it very easily now using fancy PET imaging techniques. And so one study that was recently completed was the IDEA study, imaging evidence for amyloid scanning. We were part of that study, as well as many hundreds of other sites. We looked at many people who had dementia of uncertain etiology. We were determining whether brain amyloid imaging actually made a difference in terms of our decision-making or our diagnoses. And the people who participated in the study were Medicare beneficiaries over age 65, and they had MCI or they had an atypical dementia, and there were real challenges in determining what the specific clinical diagnosis was. And these participants underwent scanning, and the scanning either showed that they had amyloid in their brain or did not have amyloid. So what we noticed when it was all said and done, and we actually did the imaging on the people here, the knowledge of whether they had a positive or negative amyloid scan led to changes in medications that we provided. And it also led to a change in the diagnosis. People who had been called Alzheimer's before, if they had a negative scan for amyloid, their Alzheimer's diagnosis changed from 71% to 10%. That actually makes a difference to someone to know that they don't have Alzheimer's versus they do have Alzheimer's disease. There's still much more research that needs to be done, and there's a new IDEA study that's looking at a larger, more racially diverse sample to see how widely spread this effect is. But I think the important thing for you to take home is that we don't use amyloid imaging right now clinically. It's not covered by insurance. No one can really afford to pay for it. It doesn't necessarily change my management in the clinics. So we are not using it clinically. And I wonder if we actually ever will from a pure clinical perspective, because one of the exciting new findings is the discovery with new techniques, modern sensitive technology, we can pinpoint some of the biomarkers of Alzheimer's in the blood. We may not need to do a $2,000 or $3,000 imaging of the brain. We might be able to do a simple blood stick and measure certain things in the blood to determine whether someone has Alzheimer's or not. So for example, in a study that was just completed and published in JAMA by Palmquist et al., they showed that a specific tau isoform, it happens to be called p-tau 217, is highly sensitive and specific for Alzheimer's and can be detected in the blood of people who have Alzheimer's. It can be detected in people who have MCI, and actually importantly, in people who have a mutation that causes familial Alzheimer's disease. It could be found in the bloodstream up to 20 years before the onset of symptoms. So this could be, I think, a game changer in terms of our ability to pinpoint the diagnosis way early in the course of disease, whether someone's going to develop an Alzheimer's process or not. Now, this is a research study. This was not a real world analysis. We need to make sure that this particular blood test becomes clinical grade and then apply it in the clinic. But I'm very hopeful that we will be using this to make the diagnosis of early features of Alzheimer's, and I think helping to stratify people whether they should go into a specific clinical trial or not. So, are you hearing me? I just want to make sure that I'm not talking to nobody. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Oh, very good. Okay. So I was just kind of giving you a sense of the fact that this is a disease that occurs over decades. And probably for us to have success as a therapy, we're going to have to be able to hit people earlier in the course of disease than we currently have been. If someone already has advanced dementia, it doesn't matter whether I reverse the underlying pathological process. They've already lost a lot of brain matter. The horse is out of the barn, if you will. So we probably need to use disease-modifying therapies much earlier in the course of disease. And we realize now that when you think more broadly about dementia, and here I'm not simply talking about Alzheimer's, I'm talking about all kinds of dementia. There are things that we can do to reduce our own risk of dementia. And some recent studies that kind of get at this, one of the things is the more we educate people, the better their risk of they lower their risk of later developing dementia. It's something about having high cognitive reserve, getting more synapses involved in circuitry that allows you to fight off, if you will, the ravages of a dementia process later in life. It's been shown in Black American younger individuals that high blood pressure, diabetes, and cardiovascular risk factors, and cerebrovascular risk factors, are all associated with worse late life cognition. So the better we can do at controlling blood pressure, hypercholesterolemia, diabetes, the better we can exercise, the more likely we are to reduce one's risk of developing dementia. And it's been shown now that basically, your body mass index, BMI, essentially a measure of whether you are obese or not, can tell you about your later life dementia risk. So early adults, age 20 to 49, who have a higher BMI, such as obesity or overweight, have a substantially increased risk of later life dementia. And for men, even in midlife, if they are obese in midlife, it increases their risk. So one of the things that I do and tell people all the time is whether you're 20, whether you're 40, 50, 60, exercise, get your weight down, eat right. If you've got diabetes, treat it. If you got hypertension, make sure it's well treated, because these things all can reduce your risk of developing later life dementia. Now, that is sort of the broad spectrum of how can we reduce our risk. But if someone already is starting to have the signs of Alzheimer's, can we slow that down? And I will say that our disease prevention trials so far have mostly focused on anti-amyloid treatments. Amyloid is critical to disease, so it kind of made sense that people would really focus on ways to reduce amyloid in the brain. And I think a lot of us were very excited about this years ago, because it basically, in mice, you could cure mice with Alzheimer's if you gave them anti-amyloid therapies. But as we all know, Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease are not the same thing. We can cure Alzheimer's disease all the time, but we have not cured Alzheimer's disease in people. And so it's led to a lot of things, such as major companies like Pfizer dropping their research on dementia medications. Biogen and SI ended their late phase 3 clinical trials of anti-amyloid drugs, including aducanumab. I'll come back to that. Roche discontinued its Alzheimer's phase 3 trials of crenezumab in patients with mild AD because these were not very effective. And so does it mean that amyloid accumulation is an ineffective target? Are we targeting too late in the game? I think both of those are relevant questions. And I think it's very clear now that amyloid as a target might make sense, but it's not going to be the game changer that we thought it would be. And let me just focus briefly on aducanumab, because aducanumab as a drug, an anti-amyloid drug, can essentially reduce amyloid plaques in the brains of people who take the drug. But they did not show a major improvement in cognition. And in one of their studies, Biogen found that there was a modest but statistically significant slowing of the rate of progression of disease in individuals who had amyloid in their brain who took aducanumab. And in fact, they went to the FDA to get approval. And just last week, despite the fact that they had this evidence of some benefit in slowing the rate of progression, FDA did not approve the drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. Treatment would potentially delay decline, but would not stop the onset of progression. I think this was a disappointment for the community and for Biogen in particular, but it does point out that we have a ways to go when it comes to therapies for Alzheimer's, and that the anti-amyloid therapies, even if given fairly early, may not be the answer that we'd hoped for. So we've got a lot of work to do, working with you in Kalamazoo, working with others around the state. There's so much that we need to do to understand Alzheimer's and other dementias and come up with better therapies and actually get the word out about the fact that behaviors in your own life can lead to reducing your risk of Alzheimer's. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is getting involved with the Michigan ADRC. The Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is one of 32 NIH-funded centers across the country. There are quite a few in the Midwest, but only one in Michigan, and we really serve the entire state of Michigan. We take that as our calling card. We are not simply an Ann Arbor center, we are a Michigan center. And in fact, our center brings together the University of Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State. Now, Western Michigan, which is near you, is not on the map, but we have actually had discussions with Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, and Central Michigan about working with them as well. But we took the 3 major research universities in the state. We've developed a collaboration. So we actually have a statewide coverage, and we can evaluate people from around the state. We also actually reach out into Northwest Ohio in the Toledo area. So any Alzheimer's center has cores, and the cores work together to try to answer questions. And I direct the center with Bruno Giordani as my associate director, but we have a clinical core, which really does the brute force of the center in terms of evaluating research participants. We have a neuropathology core that basically harvests brains from people who have donated their brains generously when they've died. And we have a large brain bank with over 1,500 brains that people can study to try to understand disease. We collect a huge amount of data. Kelly Bukulski is leading our data core. I mentioned to you that biomarkers are critical. Those new peripheral blood biomarkers are very important. And so we have Nick Kanan and Dave Morgan leading that. Imaging is a vital part of what we do. And so we have an imaging core and we have an outreach and recruitment core. And the reason I'm talking to you is my outreach and recruitment core said, hey, Hank, you got to talk to these folks. You got to get out there and outreach and recruit. And so my job mostly is to educate and to communicate. And if in any way we can work with you to advance understanding and treatment for dementia, well, that's a win-win. There's a lot of research going on at all three major universities. I'm just going to mention here that at MSU, there's tremendous work going on the key protein tau. And there's also important work on neuroinflammation. I think this is an understudied thing in dementia. We have Jonah Larda, who kind of leads efforts to try to get information out to geriatricians and primary care physicians about dementia. And Amara Eziamama is looking at the relationship between HIV disease, human immunodeficiency virus, and Alzheimer's and other dementias. We all are thinking about COVID. We just heard about COVID as you made your initial presentations. We don't yet know how COVID-19 will affect the brain and whether that will lead to later life cognitive impairment. Well, Amara is looking at that in HIV because many people now are living with HIV chronically, and they are developing cognitive impairment later in life. So the same could occur in COVID. We simply don't know yet. At Wayne State, we have colleagues such as Peter Lichtenberg, who is a phenomenal gerontologist who does a lot of work on fraud. I think you're well aware that the elderly community is very susceptible to fraud. My own mother was captured in a scam last year and fortunately didn't lose much money, but it was close. This happens all the time. Older people, whether they're cognitively impaired or not, are very susceptible to scams and fraud. And so Peter Lichtenberg does a lot of work on this vitally important thing. Yeski Damaso does a lot of imaging and memory changes. And Vojko Kavcek is looking at using EEG and other biomarkers to look at early signs of dementia. Well, much of the work that occurs in the ADRC is at my own institution, which is University of Michigan. And I'm not going to go through that in great detail, but to say to you that our bread and butter, the key project that we do as an ADRC is the Memory and Aging Project. In that study, we evaluate people longitudinally. We see them once a year. We check them cognitively, neurologically. We do fancy imaging. We do blood biomarkers. And we look at people who both have cognitive changes and people who don't, because we want to understand the course of disease and the heterogeneity of disease. This is available to people who are over age 55. And currently we have about 500 people in our cohort, and we will be expanding that in the next couple of years, provided that we get additional funding from NIH. Now, I've been talking about Alzheimer's for the most part, but another form of dementia is frontotemporal dementia, and that is an area of great strength at the University of Michigan. I'm just highlighting some of the work of Sami Barmada. Sami Barmada is a brilliant neurologist who is generating numerous cell models of disease. He can engineer changes to specific genes that underlie frontotemporal dementia, and he can manipulate them. He can generate them into human neurons in a dish, and he can follow them over time and see how things as proteins aggregating actually contribute to disease. These kinds of cell models are powerful because they give us clues to the underlying mechanism, but they also allow us to screen for drugs and genes that might be therapeutic strategies to disease. We have numerous prevention studies that we're involved in, and the AHEAD A345 study is a new one. This is basically taking individuals who have amyloid and looking to see if an anti-amyloid approach, we're not giving up on the amyloid approach, actually can make a difference for people. Ben Hamstead, who runs our clinical core, does a very novel approach to enhancing memory. He does transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS. There's a small current that's applied to the brain in specific spots of the brain. A very small current. It's about the equivalent of a battery that's in a light bulb or in a flashlight. And then he looks and sees how people do with respect to cognition. And he's found some really amazing things. People who have MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, sometimes giving them a tiny bit of electrical stimulation to the memory centers can lead to months-long improvement in memory. He's trying to figure out why this happens. Does it alter the circuitry? Is it changing things with respect to some of these accumulating proteins? We don't know quite yet. Sharia Robinson Lane is one of many people in our center who are looking at issues, not simply the people who have dementia, but caregivers. You know, there's a lot of burden that comes on families who are dealing with dementia in their families, particularly spouses or children of an individual. And so the health of caregivers, the well-being of caregivers is a critically important thing to our center. And Sharia Robinson Lane is particularly leading this, the importance of improving health outcomes for Black caregivers of persons with dementia, one of several studies that she's engaged in. And here's a fun one that's coming up soon, developing a personalized system to assist older drivers. This is something I deal with every week in the clinic. I say to people, hey, use it or lose it. You got to keep using your brain to keep it as optimized as much as you can. I want you to be socially engaged. I want you to interact with people. And then if I turn around and say, guess what? I cannot let you drive anymore. You can't go anywhere. That seems like contradictory messages. I'm saying use your brain, be socially engaged, and then I'm turning around saying you can't drive. So we need to come up with ways to better understand who can drive and who cannot drive, and frankly, come up with systems that can help older people to drive. And I think this is a very important non-pharmacological, not gene-based approach to helping the lives of people experiencing dementia. Now, we do a lot more than research. In fact, a big part of what we do is try to improve the lives of people through outreach and care. We have the Rennie Lewy Body Dementia Initiative, which started a couple years ago when Carl Rennie died with Lewy body dementia, and his wife, Tamara Reel, said, you know, it was a horrendous ordeal going through the mystery of his disease, not knowing what it was, not understanding it. She wanted us to come up with a way to get the word out about Lewy body dementia, help healthcare professionals understand what it is, and then provide support across the state. And as a result, we now have 6 support groups across the state in Lewy body dementia. This is more than any other center in the country, by far. And this is virtue of the fact that many friends of Carl Rennie and others who care about Lewy body dementia recognize that we're making a difference in helping provide support for those families that are dealing with Lewy body dementia. We have a wellness initiative that focuses on well-being of those who are experiencing memory impairment and their caregivers. Laura is an incredibly talented person who uses a wide variety of approaches, including mindfulness-based stress reduction to help people with dementia care. There's a lot more that can be found at our website on wellness. And one of the things that they're doing is a new Mitten Minds Dementia Education Series and Support Group. I gave a talk in this just last month. These are people who are families who are dealing with dementia, where we can provide support and give education about various things that are occurring in disease. So that was a whirlwind. It wasn't 96 slides. I did cut it down quite a bit. We have 15 research studies we're doing right now. I would love for us to collaborate and partner with you all in Kalamazoo down the road, and any way we can in terms of providing education or having your community participate in any of our clinical trials as well. You can find a list of these studies at our website, and there are a bunch of different kinds of studies that are available to you. This is a picture a couple years ago from our center. It's, I think it's even bigger now than it was then. And we have a monthly e-newsletter that you can certainly subscribe for as well. We'd be delighted to provide you that information if you want. So I will stop sharing my screen and be happy to take questions if you have them. Ashley, turning it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Paulson. We really appreciate you joining us today and your continued efforts to raise awareness about dementia and current research initiatives. I think that's really helpful for us to hear and have some hope. We'll continue to share events and opportunities to engage with the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Michigan. And we'll share a link to the center's webpage in the chat box. It doesn't look like we have any specific questions for you right now, but if anyone does follow up with questions, I'll be sure to share those. We do have access to you now, so we
And
might
I
be
would
asking
say
you
that, you know,
questions.
clearly, I'm happy to share the slides. It sounds like you are recording this, which is great. But we can also share the slides if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to email those to me, I can make sure we get those to any attendees
Okay.
who are interested.
We will do that.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate
Oh,
it.
it's a pleasure. Any questions for me, or
I don't have any specific questions for you.
all right? Well, I wish you all well, and we'll keep in touch. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Next up, we're just going to go through some more exciting things that are happening here at Heritage with the Memory Care Learning Center. The next piece of our presentation will involve just looking over our webpage. Over the last few months, we've been working with LKF Marketing in Kalamazoo here and creating a webpage for the Memory Care Learning Center. And I'm really excited to share the final product with you today. I'll share the link to the webpage in the chat box as well. That way you can follow along with me as we explore the new site. Amanda should be popping that in there. Otherwise, the web address is pretty simple. It's memorycarelearningcenter.com. So we'll swap over to that. Okay, you should be able to see the web page here. And when you access the page, you're going to open right up to our home page. Let me just readjust a few things here. All right. So on our webpage here, you can navigate to a number of different pages through the web menu. When you open the site, you'll see our homepage. It's a really nice overview of what the center has to offer. About 2/3 of the way down, you'll see a really great video of the center. It offers a walkthrough of the Memory Care Learning Center. So after we're done with the presentation, I encourage you to take a look at that. It's a really nice visual walkthrough so you can see the plans that we have for reworking the space. If you're familiar with Amber Way at all, it's going to be quite a change to that space. So going through that will give you kind of an expectation of what we'll see when we open the doors next summer. So make sure you take a look there. There's also options to donate and connect with us throughout the web page. The next page I'll show you is our events page, which is really important to us as we plan more events and programs for all of you. On the events page, you'll see some upcoming events, and you have the opportunity to register for any of those that interest you. So previously, our event today was on here. You were able to register there, and these are some upcoming events that we have. All of our programs that are designed for family members or caregivers are free and they're open to the public. So please feel free to share with anyone who you feel might benefit. We also plan to host seminars and conferences in the future that will offer professional education opportunities for healthcare providers. So when you come to the site, you'll click register for an event and it'll add the event to your cart and you can move forward with registering. Future events will offer a wide variety of topic areas, including general education opportunities, connection to area resources, and caregiver wellness programs. We hope you'll find programs that fit your needs, and please always feel free to share ideas for what would be helpful to you as a caregiver. Again, these events are free to you and to the general public. You will also see alternative means of registering here at the bottom of the page. And at the, there's some Zoom information if you need help with that. You'll also see archived events here. So you can see that our virtual launch event will be shared here after we complete the program. You'll be able to access it and see that video after today. We'll also share that on our Facebook page. The next page we have to highlight here is our donations page. On this page, you'll see an update on where we are in the process for fundraising for the Memory Care Learning Center. You can see what our plans are moving forward and what's needed in order for us to keep the project moving. You'll also see a number of ways that you can contribute to the cause. All of our donations are monitored by Kim Loftis, who you heard from earlier, through the Heritage Community of Kalamazoo Foundation. So some really great details there if you're interested in reading that, and multiple options for giving. On our About page, you can learn more about our mission and plans for the future. You'll also see a small sampling of some of our current partners who walk with us in our work to increase access to dementia resources and education. We'll continue to increase our pool of partners and make them accessible to the families and caregivers who could benefit from their services. You'll see some of their logos here. We look forward to making more connections and strengthening the network of organizations that are working to support dementia, education, and research in Kalamazoo and across the state. If you navigate to our contact page, you'll see a form that allows you to contact us directly and enroll in our mailing list. Opting in will allow us to keep you informed of upcoming programs, potential research, available resources, and connections with community partners that may be of value to you. On the right side of the page, you'll also see a map directing you to where the physical Memory Care Learning Center will be once we open in the summer. The final tab on our webpage is the cart function. And so in this cart, you'll see any of the programs that you registered for, any events that you've signed up to participate in. You'll also see any donations that you wanted to submit to the Memory Care Learning Center show up in the cart here for your readiness to check out. To navigate back to the homepage at any point, just click the Memory Care Learning Center logo in the upper left-hand corner. So that gives you a little taste of our webpage. I encourage you to explore it a little bit more. We're very proud of what has been developed so far, and we're excited to be able to add more resources, including programs, handouts, and just connections to area providers. So as we wrap up, I just want to share with you our connection page here and just encourage you to connect with us. We have the website up and running. We also have a dedicated email for you to connect with us, and that can be specific questions about the Memory Care Learning Center or just about memory care in general. Heritage has 2 memory care communities here on campus, Amber Way and Amber Place, that are both thriving environments for people who have memory care challenges, have memory challenges. We also have a Facebook page, so please feel free to connect there. We push out resources and share events there. Our phone number is also on the screen. And if you are interested in donating, we have a link to the Heritage Community Foundation page. And I believe Amanda's sharing a lot of this in the chat for you so that you have those links. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited for the future of the Memory Care Learning Center and what kind of opportunities will come for you and for us here at Heritage. It's an exciting time for us, and we're just grateful that you're here on the journey for what's to come. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop those in the chat box, and we'll plan on wrapping up by answering any of those questions. Excellent. It looks like the links are in there if you want to grab any of those for the future. And then again, we will share this on our Facebook page and our website, so you can review it or share it with others. So thank you all for attending and joining us today, and stay tuned for more to come.